Well, 7 p.m. here, and I want to welcome all of you coming on board for this great opportunity to hear from the Dornan family. I have been a member of Wyoming Interfaith Network for about a year and a half, and my name is Pamela Glasser. I'm in seminary with the Episcopal Church and a member of St. Thomas in Du Bois. And I have found the crew, all the members of the Wyoming Interfaith Network to be an amazing group of people, all working together to try to present like we are tonight, opportunities to understand and respect people and their faith, and how enriching that becomes as we can uncover all of these great mysteries. We offer a monthly sharing called Threads of Wisdom. Lori Stoltz manages that. And we usually have a topic that you can quote poetry or literature or scripture in relation to that. Last month in January, we did blessings. February ahead here, we are going to share ideas about affection. We are starting also in February and running through May a book discussion, different sessions on a book called My Neighbor's Faith, which is a set of experiences people have shared in meeting people in their lives, unexpectedly finding great mysteries unfolding as well. And Katrina Bradley, every other Wednesday, has a wonderful discussion time. We do a fireside chat via Zoom, again on a topic, and share scriptures, take turns reading and discussing them. So there are many opportunities. But tonight's great treasure is hearing from David and Reade Dornan. And they have shared a short bio I'd like to read for you. Both David and Reade have Quaker ancestry. David's grandmother was from an established Quaker family in Philadelphia, and David's father went to Germantown Friends School. However, when his father moved to Moose, Wyoming, he became a lapsed Quaker, and David was not raised in the Quaker faith. Reade's Quaker ancestors were more distant relatives who lived in the Chesapeake, Virginia region. Those were her mother's family. On her father's side, she was more directly related to strong abolitionists from New York. Her great-grandparents were supporters of Frederick Douglass and John Brown. When it came time to oppose the Vietnam War, the Dornans were grad students in Berkeley, California. They strongly opposed the war, like so many of their fellow students at the University of California. But Berkeley, the home of student protests in the 60s, spawned many a radical, and they were not always peaceable resistors. So David and Reade, more moderate in their views, looked around for a responsible institution that would help them navigate all of the turmoil of the time. That's when they remembered their family origins and returned to Quakerism. They joined the peace movement in the famed Vine Street meeting. Eventually, they raised their children in Quaker first day schools, and they sent their younger daughter to Westtown, a Quaker boarding school in Philadelphia. Westtown exemplifies the Quaker values by giving full equality to both boys and girls, and also to children of color. It is the oldest co-ed boarding school in the United States, and it accepted African American students way back in the late 18th century during the time of George Washington. So over the years, Dave and Reade have come full circle in their own lives, finding meaning in the values of their ancestors and linking them to their own life practices today. As they present tonight, I hope that you will type in your questions for them that we'll address at the end of the session. And please type them in the chat room, and then I will help you facilitate having them answer them near the end of the session. So please join with me in welcoming David and Reade Dornan. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you, Pamela, for the introduction. I'm going to begin. And we were involved in peaceful protests in Berkeley during the Vietnam War while we were getting our graduate degrees. And what we learned at Vine Street meeting, it, not only that Quakers are a peace church, but we learned why they oppose war, why they are known as a peace church. And it's because of a very basic principle in Quakerism that there is something of God in everyone. And it underlies just about everything that Quakers do and stand for, that they, this basic principle that everyone has a spirit, or what we call in Quakerism the inner light uh, of divinity in them. So you have to treat people in a very different way as a Quaker if you believe that they share something of the divine. And so we began as war protesters, but we became very much committed to Quakerism. And for the next 50, 60 years, we have tried to be a part of Quaker practice. Uh, it, we will talk more about how Quakers practice their faith, but the important thing that underlies it is the quest for understanding peace and respect of other people. That's really the beginning point and the origin of Quakerism. It began in England in 1640 with a man named George Fox, who was protesting the established church, which he felt didn't speak to people the way they should. It was very authoritarian, and people had no real voice in what was done inside churches. So George Fox would often interrupt church meetings and say what he thought about the inner light and how we should behave. And it led to a certain amount of difficulties for Quakers. They were in prison for being heretics, and they protested not only the church but the government for inhumane practices. So they had a rough beginning. And then when many of them immigrated to America, including William Penn, who founded Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, for the first time, the Native Americans were treated honorably, and the Quakers became highly respected because they were very honest in the businesses they established and truthful to their word. And so their history in America prospered in many ways. They left behind the struggles in England for acceptance and freedom in America. And my grandmother was a Quaker family that used the familiar verbs thee and thou, and was what we think of today as very conservative, traditional Quaker. But when she and my father came to Wyoming and homesteaded uh, and established a little gas ranch in Moose. They pretty much stopped practicing Quakerism, and my dad married a local woman who was an Episcopalian, and that's the church we were raised in until I ended up at Berkeley and discovered the Vine Street meeting.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about there of that in there that of God in every person. The connotations of that are immense because they led to a split between traditional Quakers and non-traditional Quakers in that they began to argue about how much God is there in everyone, and um, and where is the limit? Where is the border between, say, a human and humans' limitations and God? So you can imagine over the centuries how much division that has led to. But I'm going to set that aside for a minute and just talk about what it meant to me as a young woman, a girl almost in the 60s in a radical graduate school where women's lib was just being discovered. And so gender equality became huge for the Vine Street meeting. And to push it in every direction was the way our meeting went. Now, not all meetings in America went that way, but remember, we were in Berkeley, in California, and probably among the most liberal interpreters of that of God in every person. So, but since that time, I mean, we've been Quakers for now over 50 years, well over 50 years. And we've seen the debates, the disputes and debates and conversations play out in not only in gender, but in arguments about race and how race can be fully respected in every sense of the word. Age, first day school and adult education are considered equal. Young people are considered equal with old people. That, as you can imagine, leads to a lot of other discussion. Quakers have been known to take the sides of Palestinians who are terrorists because we have seen there of that of God in Palestinians, in the worst offenders in prisons. Quakers have done a lot of work in prisons to work with inmates. There's, in fact, somebody on the group today who's an activist in the prisons and helping out inmates. Our Quaker meetings are run with a complete sense of equality. Anybody who thinks they have something to share with the meeting can stand up out of silence and hold forth. And in some cases, that can lead to iconoclastic remarks. In some cases, it can lead to highly controversial statements. But we don't allow debate in meeting. Somebody can stand up and speak from the heart, speak from the spirit within. And even if the rest of us don't agree with it, we sit silently and think about it and wait to understand it. Sit in silent waiting. So, as you can imagine, this has led to an awful lot of disagreement over the years in all the meetings we've belonged to. We've belonged to 3 or 4 different meetings, but it usually pans out if we follow Quaker practice of listening and listening in silence, not arguing with each other, not speaking to one another, just listening. So as you can tell, we don't have a minister. We don't have a preacher in our practice of Quakerism. There are Quakers who do have programmed meetings, do have ministers, do have hymns, don't sit in silence, completely different practice. They're mostly evangelical Quakers. And the saving grace in Quakerism is we don't have a central church that tries to adjudicate all these differences. We live and let live in every way. So evangelicals celebrate Quakerism their way, and non-programmed people celebrate Quakerism their way. And as you can imagine, we consider everyone equal because if we're committed to equality, we're committed to equality. I'll say a couple of other things about our practice. Simplicity of dress, speech, and style. We don't emphasize wealth. We try, but we don't put it down either. I mean, there are wealthy Quakers and unwealthy Quakers, and Quaker meetings do the best they can to level the playing field among everyone. Same thing with Quaker boarding schools. There are obviously many Quaker boarding schools that are highly prestigious, and a lot of wealthy kids come to the school, like Sidwell School in DC, where Clinton sent Chelsea to school. I think Obama sent his kids to Sidwell as well. But guess what? They're treated equally in school. And I'm sure it's difficult to maintain those standards, but they do. Some of you may associate Quakerism with the Quaker Oats box. The Quaker Oats man wears this black hat and black outfit. That comes from our long-standing practice of simple dress and simple style to de-emphasize class difference. And most Quakers gave up Quaker dress in the late 1800s because it seemed more showy than what it was supposed to do, which was de-emphasize style. And so that leads to one other practice, not just equality, but simplicity. Simplicity, I think of as the fourth tenet to Quakerism. So we have the peace practice. We have a lot of emphasis on harmony in peace and justice. Number 2, we have the idea of the inner light. Number 3, the idea of equality. Number 4, the idea of simplicity. So those are the 4 big tenets of Quakerism. We carry them out in everything: weddings, funerals, celebrations of Easter, and so forth. They're all the same. In the non-programmed meetings, there are silent meetings where people can stand up and say something, sing a song, do a dance if they want, and then sit down quietly, and everybody gives them respect for that time. Okay, Dave is going to talk a little bit more about practice.
I'm going to talk about what it's like to be in the Quaker meeting, but let me first make a distinction. We have 2 kinds of meetings. We have meeting for worship and meeting for business. And what we do is have someone in charge, a manager that we call a clerk, and that's selected by everyone. You know, we're all in agreement who will be the clerk of the meeting. And currently, I'm the clerk of the Jackson Friends meeting here. And we we don't have our own meeting house. Meeting houses, as Reade said, are very plain and simple, but the Episcopal Church in Jackson, St. John's Church, has kindly let us use their chapel, which is a very nice place. And as a child, that's where I went to church with my mother. At any rate, we're a small congregation and we try to sit in a circle. So there's, again, not a sense of someone in charge or higher than anyone else. So we arrange chairs in a circle and we settle into silent meditation, and that can sometimes last the entire hour of our meeting for worship. But if people feel the Spirit moving them to say something that is from the heart and has that they can't help but share with the group, they say their piece and we listen in silence and give them space before anyone else speaks. So it's very, there's a good deal of silent meditation and trying to center yourself so that you have the opportunity to express what is very meaningful if you want to give any oral ministry. And the, the clerk then at, at the end of the assigned time for meeting, uh, ask if anyone has a concern that they wish to share with the others before we rise from meeting. And then after we rise from meeting, we enter into a friendship conversation. And before COVID, we would often go out for a cup of coffee or something. But it's all centered on silent meditation and speaking the message that comes to us through the silent meditation, if any message does come. Our business meeting, in a typical on-program meeting, they have monthly business meetings, and that's again organized and chaired by the clerk, who has an agenda of topics. If the Quakers own their own meeting house, there's a lot of business about the care of the meeting house, and then there's some committees that give reports, committees that provide support for other people or are involved in other Quaker issues. And then if we have to make a decision, like how much we should spend on something, or when we should have a picnic or a retreat or whatever, or something more controversial, it has to be by consensus. We have to get everyone thinking the same way before we can make a decision and write a minute to that effect. And what happens sometimes is that dissenters will say, you know, I can't really agree, but I'm going to step aside to let you make that decision. I won't interfere. But generally, everyone is of the same line. And I've only known a few times where we've had large controversies where it was difficult to reach consensus, but that's the Quaker practice. Then beyond a monthly business meeting, if you're in a place with more population, there may be quarterly meetings and then yearly meetings. In Michigan, our yearly meeting was called uh, the Ohio yearly meeting. And
Lake Erie.
Lake Erie yearly meeting, and a dozen other program Quaker meetings would get together once a year to share issues or have discussion groups or talks. And in Wyoming at this time, our different Quaker meetings, we get together in state, but we don't belong to a yearly meeting. There is Intermountain yearly meeting, but we haven't participated in it yet. The Quaker experience in Wyoming is still relatively new, and although we have local gatherings in 4 or 5 different places throughout the state, we have trouble just meeting. Lately, we've been meeting on Zoom for quarterly meetings, and we haven't had a yearly statewide meeting for a couple of years because of the pandemic. So that's some of the structure that we practice, and you can become a member of a meeting. The meeting in Wyoming is the statewide group, and how you become a member is there's you send a request that you want to be a member, and then there's a committee that talks to you about what it means to be a Quaker and see if you understand the commitment or the nature of Quakerism. It's not a rigorous exam by any means. It's just if you're ready to be a Quaker, pretty much is what's going on. We want to determine that. And it's the same kind of clearness committee if you want to be married in a Quaker meeting. A number of friends getting together to talk about the commitment and the implications and the meaning of being married in a Quaker church, which then has a responsibility to oversee the wedding. And again, without ministers, it's the clerk who would officiate, and we are allowed by law to conduct weddings if we're a clerk of a Quaker meeting. The proper name really is the Religious Society of Friends, but we use the word Quaker from the olden days when people were so excited to had the freedom to worship this way, that they would shake in ecstasy. That's how the name Quaker came about. Reade is going to take over now.
So I need to say a little bit more about the history of Quakerism, because in the 1800s, the Quakers, the traditional Quakers, decided that the rest of us were not pure enough because the original Quakers in England had questioned the purity of the Episcopal Church, which was the Church of England at the time, and certainly opposed Catholicism because it was too elaborate and had gotten away from the foundational beliefs, or so they argued. Well, Quakerism sort of had the same kind of split in the 1800s here in America, between the people who wanted to adhere to the very old foundational beliefs, stripped of elaborate service, stripped of ministry that would separate the communication between man and or humans and God, and insisted on a greater simplicity. And they split away from those people who wanted to maintain church service, wanted to maintain ministers, and so forth. And those became, there's a strong set of those Quakers here in America. They are mostly evangelical. They are mostly established in the Midwest, in Indiana, Kansas, the Bible Belt part of Kansas. Wichita has a very strong evangelical Quaker meeting. And then the rest of the Quakers, those who are mostly established in university towns, I would say, across America, are more liberal, they're unprogrammed, and so forth. So I think if I had to sum up Quakerism, I would say it's not so much a system of beliefs as it is a framework for asking the right questions about religion, about God, about spirituality, and so forth. For me, Quakerism has to do with being truth-seeking, truth understanding, if you can believe in truth and not some kind of relative definition of that. Most of the Quaker meetings that I'm attached to don't follow dogma. They don't believe in the Trinity. They don't believe in the Bible as a literal definition of a relationship of humans to God. They believe it mostly in Bible as history and as inspiration and as guidance. It is not required for any of the Quaker meetings I've belonged to be Christocentric. That is, to believe in Christ as a savior, or the one, the truth and the life, that sort of phrase. They don't practice with iconography or even with a cross in the room. And so when we sat in St. John's Chapel, we had to decide what we were going to do about the altar and the cross. And we just decided it was not irrelevant, but not that much, not important enough to argue about either. We don't have music in our service unless somebody wants to sing. And tell you the truth, I grew up in the Episcopal Church and I miss the music. So uh, Quakers like me who are hidebound Episcopalians at one time, we get together and sing before meeting or after meeting sometimes. It depends on whether we have somebody in meeting who can play the piano. Um, so you can see our practice is just amazingly different, not only within and among Quakers and Quakerism, but also from other Protestant churches. We separate ourselves mainly by the simplicity of practice. I want to say just a couple of things about how we organize ourselves, because we're such a loose band of people with a loose set of practices. How can we possibly get along? Well, as I said earlier, we don't try to organize ourselves too much. We don't try to unify ourselves. We don't try to set standards. We don't try to set regulations for everybody. Each meeting has its own practices and its own way of doing things each week. In fact, our meeting here in Jackson is very different from the meeting that we belong to in Michigan for 35 years. And that doesn't seem to pose a problem for most Quakers. But we do have a number of organizations that hold us together, that provide some sort of cement to this loose band of associations. One of them is the yearly meetings that Dave made mention of. Yearly meetings are essentially conferences once a year that pull people together, largely geographically, but also around the split between evangelicals and non-evangelicals. So a meeting like ours will have to sit down and find in its heart of hearts which yearly meeting they want to be a part of. And if I had to guess, the Quaker meeting in the state of Wyoming, there's only one Quaker meeting and all the rest of us are worship groups. All the little worship groups, I think there's one there's no worship group in Du Bois, but there's one in Lander, none in Casper, one in Sheridan, Laramie, Cheyenne, sort of the big cities. And here. And we'd get together, we'd have to decide which yearly meeting we're going to be a part of. And if I had to guess, I would guess it would be the Intermountain yearly meeting, which is mainly located in Boulder, Colorado. They have a yearly meeting there that would be compatible in thought and practice with what we do. But oh my gosh, there are dozens of other yearly meetings we could be a part of. We could be a part of Friends General Conference, which moves around in Midwest and West. And they meet for a week every July and they get together. And I could just mention Philadelphia yearly meeting, which is one of the oldest yearly meetings. I can mention Iowa yearly meeting, Delaware yearly meeting, and each of these names means something in Quakerism that sort of defines that spectrum between very traditional and very liberal. So, Quakerism comes in all colors, and their practices are confirmed by the yearly meetings they belong to. A couple of other organizations I should make mention of. We have a lobbying arm called Friends Committee on National Legislation, and it is a hot group of liberal ideas. And I don't think many of the evangelicals embrace a lot of the FCNL lobbying, but it's kept separate. FCNL is kept separate. So any evangelical groups who want to promote or oppose some of FCNL's ideas, they can either feed their ideas into FCNL or go off on their own. There's no mandate that everyone adhere to the same political practices. The other group I would mention is the American Friends Service Committee. That is an activist group. They work with borders. They work in Palestine and Israel. They work all over the world. And in fact, to tell you the truth, I was really interested in Quakerism long before I met David, because I was in Europe after World War II. This dates me quite a bit. After World War II, and I wanted to do some kind of work project. And I found a group in Austria who were building an old people's home, a retirement community out of the bricks that had been piled up after the bombing in Austria. And we did that work project for weeks with Quaker meetings every night after we worked during the day. We hauled wheelbarrows full of bricks and built walls. And then at night we talked about Quaker principles. And so that got me interested in Quakerism long before I became a war activist, because I thought it was fascinating that a little known group with no money whatsoever would find this kind of project to work on. And AFSC, the American Friends Service Committee, has a lot of these all over the world.
If I could interrupt, AFSC received the Nobel Peace Prize after the Second World War for the aid they did helping reconstruct Germany.
And Ray Snyder, who was the old lead for AFSC, was instrumental in bringing together Sadat and Jimmy Carter in the peace process there. He was really a strong advisor to that peace process. So the Quakers are not very numerous. In fact, there are hardly any of us, but the AFSC and the FCNL are both powerful practices of our beliefs. And the final thing I'll mention are Quaker schools. Quaker schools have been around since the 1800s. They're pretty poorly funded, as so many schools are. I don't know why, but Quakers pride themselves in sort of, giving their kids bread and water. No, I'm exaggerating by quite a bit. They're very plain schools with very plain privileges. Let's put it that way, for the most part. Their schools, K through 12 education, a lot of Quaker K through 12 education, but mostly what are funded are elementary schools in different big cities. I mentioned Detroit Friends School earlier. Dave was on the board for Detroit Friends School. It's mostly a great school. They don't have high school anymore, do they?
Not anymore. No.
And their mission is really interracial and diverse education. They're very strong commitment to equality, racial equality in Detroit Friends School. Our daughter went to a Quaker boarding school in Philadelphia. It was way more posh than I thought Quaker school should be, with 3 tennis courts and so forth, but she got a good education there. And we used to bring her home and say, wait a minute, just because you go to boarding school doesn't mean you have to act like a rich kid. So we tried to balance off the misguidance she would get from her wealthy classmates whenever we could. I want to mention 3 really well-known colleges. Haverford, our nephew went to Haverford, Swarthmore, and Bryn Mawr. And to this day, they don't make their kids go to Quaker meeting, but they do use Quaker principles and practices running those schools. So there's a strong emphasis on consensus in decision making, on listening to each other, on quiet listening, on bringing equality to everybody who's part of the system. Faculty and students are equal, theoretically. Those are 3 prestigious schools, but there's quite a few smaller, lesser known Quaker colleges. There's Guilford in North Carolina, there's George Fox in Oregon, Whittier, where Nixon went to school. You know, they always said Nixon was a Quaker, and Quakers said, no, he isn't. but I think he went to Whittier.
Yes.
And Earlham, which is a really well-known evangelical Quaker college that is such a good school. Our liberal daughter strongly considered going to school there. She didn't. She went to St. John's instead. But I think Quaker colleges help cement who we are, help hold us together, even though our practices are widely diverse. And I think you could probably find as many different definitions of Quakerism in our meeting as there are meeting attenders. Oh, that's one other thing I should say. Dave talked about joining the Quaker meetings. There are 2 kinds of people who come to Quaker meeting, attenders and members. And believe it or not, there are very few members. Most people are attenders, but again, they're treated equally. We really try hard not to think that some Quakers are weightier than others, and that some, because they're members, should have their ideas should have stronger sway. So I think that's pretty much what we wanted to talk about.
Thank you so much, David and Reade. I'm going to remind everyone as questions come up for you, if you can find the chat room, it should be below all of the little Hollywood squares that we have in front of us. And there's a little chat thing with like a balloon for discussion. If you would type in some questions there, hopefully David and Reade can give us even more enlightenment. Thank you so much for that great presentation.
The first question I see in the chat room is asking if there is historic faith connection between Quakers and Shakers. There certainly is connection between Quakers and other peace groups. I don't think there's one with Shakers, but the Brethrens, the Amish, and Mennonites, we have a lot in common, and occasionally we meet with them because they have a basic belief and commitment to peace. The Shakers, as far as I know, disappeared, but they were more isolationist.
If
type.
somebody else wants to correct us on that, please do.
I see a comment from Tom Reese that the Shakers were the shaking Quakers and did more with dancing and music. Or that
could well be true. I didn't know that.
I had heard that, but I don't think they believe the same thing. there was much greater emphasis on chastity among the Shakers than there were among
Okay.
the Quakers.
Uh,
Yeah, that would.
there's a question about the abolitionist history of the Quakers, and that's an important part of the history of American Quakers. We were very active in the Underground Railroad, and just a couple of years ago, Reade and I visited the part of Maryland where the Underground Railroad was, and in the African American Museum in DC, and they do give credit for this Quakers as people who gave shelter and aid to escaping Black slaves, and we were Quakers were very active in supporting abolition. There's no doubt about it. In fact, they may have started doing that long before any other church was involved. Who was the Quaker?
John Woolman.
John Woolman.
Yeah, I'd like
John
to say
Woolman.
a couple of things about John Woolman. He was just enormously committed to freeing the slaves, and spent 3 to 5 years traveling among Quaker meetings throughout Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. I don't think he went as far south as Alabama, but Georgia.
No.
And persuading Quakers to give up slavery. Quakers did not initially, naturally want to give up slavery, but they came to that conviction through John Woolman's persistence as he traveled from meeting house to meeting house, working and reworking and talking and persuading. It wasn't easy for Quakers even, but they, of course, you've heard about Harriet Tubman and the houses she went to. Crossing the Ohio River was terribly important for a lot of escaped slaves. And just on the other side of the river is where the Quaker houses, many of them were. And in fact, you're from Detroit. In East Lansing, there was a house that was owned by Quakers, used for hiding away escaped slaves. And our meeting house loved it. The person who owned the house was a Quaker, and it was really fun to see how you could hide away slaves and never have a hint of their presence in that property. But it took a long time. And we have used that philosophy, or if you call it a philosophy, that ideology of helping people in distress. We used it for Guatemalans and Salvadorans in the 80s, and Nicaraguans, bringing them up into America. It was called the Mariposa Project. And we smuggled them, Quakers did, through Quaker meetings up through the United States to Canada, just the way we did in the 1800s with Harriet Tubman and others who were bringing slaves out of the South.
Thank you for that. And it looks like Tom has affirmed the celibacy of Shakers, which would explain a diminishing membership there.
Yes.
There's a question also from Ben Reade. In relationship to what is centering directed during meetings, if this centering is at the center of one's daily practice? And what are examples, or differences between the meetings?
So
you mentioned some about Jackson and Michigan, Jackson Hole and Lansing, Michigan.
I'll answer the first one first. I live Quakerism every single day, every single minute. And when Dave and I have big fights, I have to go. I am certainly not a non-fighter. And I have to pull myself back and center myself and be quiet. And when we have big arguments in Quaker meetings about practice, about belief, about whatever, money, sometimes about money, everybody says, let's have a moment of silence. And a moment of silence can last 15, 20 minutes, half hour, until people settle down and come to some kind of peaceful resolution. May not agree, but at least they're centered. They've found some kind of peace within, and they've tapped into that for quietude. A difference between Jackson meeting in Michigan. Well, the Michigan meeting was huge. We had a meeting house and we had a lot of kids in the meeting house. We had probably 100 members there, and with a lot of kids in first day school. And a lot of the practice was given over to how to run the meeting house equitably. Here in Jackson Hole, there are 8 to 15 who show up on a good day. And there is unanimity. I mean, there's no disagreement. We don't tithe. We forgot to say that, but we don't tithe in Quakerism. People come up with money when there's a need. If we had a meeting house, we'd have to come up with a lot more money. But here in Jackson Hole, we don't have our own meeting house, and somebody can come to meeting on a cold February morning and say, I'm really concerned that not enough people in Jackson can pay for their heating. Can we pass the hat and help pay for some heating credits? And we've done that winter after winter here. We've also sent money to the border to help kids at the border. We are always looking for responsible outlets for money, and we take up the hat when the call is made. So it's a huge difference between here and Michigan, where they have a lot more responsibility.
I want to say a couple words too, Ben, about centering. It is a discipline to free your mind from trivia, concerns, worries, and to focus on silence and quietude. It takes a while to find that center where you're not concerned about the immediate issues or whatever is going through your head. And the process, I think, is the same in any meeting, wherever you are. In Jackson, because we have a lot of silence and few members, you're given more time to center at least. But it's the same process of trying to shut out all the noise in your head and just find something to focus on that is meaningful. I can't read those from here.
What's the biggest challenge you face in Wyoming that's unique to being a Quaker? Oh, there are not enough Quakers. That's the biggest challenge.
Well, Wyoming culture goes against the grain of Quakers the history in Wyoming of the Wild West and guns and violence and all of that, it is not the kind of society that we hope for. So I'm not really opposed to guns themselves, but I am opposed to violence and using guns as a solution to any argument. But Wyoming just simply has a different culture that makes it difficult to promote peace and peaceful resolutions.
Thank you for that. Have you had any contact with Casper community of Quakers?
Very little. There's two Quakers we know in Casper, but they one of them is from England, in fact, and the other is a medical doctor in Casper, but they aren't really involved in the statewide thing unless we have an annual retreat of some sort.
Did you know Mako Miller when she was with us? I think she passed away 3 years ago.
No.
Mako, some of you know Mako. She's the only Quaker I've ever met before you. And she was a wonderful lady that presented a lot of the international work that Quakers have done. She herself was a child during World War II with a Southern Belle mother Quaker who had married a diplomat in Japan. And he had to leave and they had to stay during World War II. They were in Japan. And it was a rough time for her. But wonderful lady. She gave us a lot of great intercultural things too. Are there any other questions that anybody might have for us?
I think there's one in the chat there, Pamela.
Did I miss? Okay.
From
let's see what's happened to my chat room. My chat room has gone funky here. How different is centering in Quakerism from the centering prayer of Thomas Keating? And that's from Ron Frost. Thank you, Ron.
What does Ron think it there? What difference does he see?
How different is your Quaker centering from the centering prayer of Thomas Keating?
Yeah, tell us about Thomas Keating.
Thanks, Ron.
Well, Thomas Keating established both the centering prayer and contemplative prayer through the Catholic Church, and has written many, many books on it.
Oh, we should look into it.
Yes, and well, I'm a Buddhist, and centering prayer is as close to, as I can see, to Buddhism as anything in Christianity.
Yeah, we have a number of Buddhists who come both to our meeting and to the Buddhist worship groups here. And we find ourselves very compatible with that group.
Yes. Well, I've been to some of the Quaker meetings in Laramie, so.
Yeah, we have a strong commitment not only to honoring a religious practice that's close to ours, but even to, sorry about my throat, we have strong respect for all religions. And in fact, my own daughter who went to Quaker boarding school has raised her children Jewish. So you never know when you have a child which direction they're going to go in. But I have to say I have a soft spot in my heart for the Buddhists.
My brother was a Buddhist, and we would meditate together, and it's a similar process. He would use the mantra to center himself, and I would just try to free my mind of trivia to center, but it's a similar process.
And what would you say about Thomas Keating? What would he add to it?
Basically, the centering prayer of Thomas Keating is essentially what you're talking about, watching your mind, and when thoughts come up, just waving goodbye. Don't jump onto a thought, and don't try to violently thrust the thought aside. Just sort of say, okay, there's a thought, bye-bye. I'm going back to the emptiness which is beneath the thoughts.
Right.
Anne Marie has shared a website, www.contemplativeoutreach.org is the Thomas Keating website. Thank you, Anne Marie. That's in the chat room for you all.
Pretty cool.
Well, I would invite us all to give a tremendous big thank you to David and Reade, Dornan. Thank you for your time and all the insights you've shared. God bless you all. Yeah, thank you all.
For your patience.
Applause isn't so great on Zoom.
Time delay, yeah.
We get one clap at a time.
Thumbs up, how's that?
There you go. Thank you. And Katrina, do you know the date of our next Mosaic of Faith conversation? I don't have it handy. I'm sorry.
I can get it for you, but you're going to have to give me a minute. I will be looking if the conversation continues that long.
Okay. I believe it's an open conversation on
Yes.
marriage and family.
That's correct.
Okay, I'm giving you time.
I'm looking.
But look for another announcement to come out about that through the Wyoming Interfaith Network newsletters and announcement emails. And as well as the book club information will be coming out probably tomorrow.
Are you all based in Du Bois, or are you based in
all over
Du Bois?
the state? Pamela
All over the
happens
state.
to be, yeah, Pamela happens to be in Du Bois, but
Okay.
Yeah.
If I could direct a question to Pamela briefly. I don't know much about it, but Ring Lake is a
Yeah.
place that seems to support a contemplative Christianity. And
Yes.
is there anything you could just tell us about that while we're here? Because it seems supportive or parallel to this conversation.
Thank you, Ben. Ring Lake Ranch has sponsored all types of symposiums, and almost always in the summertime because of the
Yes.
access to the place.
The weather, yeah.
And that's right. That's right. And I think that they should, I don't know how to reach, and I don't have a computer that I can multitask on, but if we look up Ring Lake Ranch, they should have some postings of what they're presenting this next summer. They did close it down one summer, a couple of summers ago because of COVID, but I think they
Do they
figured out how
maintain-
to make safe meeting.
Okay.
And
Do they
it's
maintain
absolutely beautiful place.
Yes.
Absolutely beautiful.
Are they formally
Warren
affiliated?
Murphy, if he's still here.
Yeah,
If Warren's still on, Warren has
Still
been
on.
active there. Warren,
Yeah.
can you share more?
sure. I was on their board, actually their founding board a number of years ago. It's a ecumenical, basically that's what they call themselves, ecumenical guest ranch. But they focus on religious and spiritual programs. That's just a small part of it. Those sessions are in the evening. But during the day, you got freedom to do whatever you want to do out in the mountains next to the lakes and the base of the Wind Rivers. It used to be a rough road to get there. It's not so rough anymore. It's been well fixed up. Probably I don't like that, but people come. But it is a wonderful place. It's a good community. It has a stable community. It has some of the top speakers in the world have been there to do programs. I'd highly recommend it. You can find their website, just Ring Lake Ranch, and all the information's there, including their upcoming programs. Sadly, in the last couple of years, a lot of those programs fill up early. They only have so much space. But it's one of the only religious or spiritual, really, gathering places in the whole state of Wyoming where anybody of any kind can come and be there. Hope that helps.
Thank you.
It's in an area rich with ancient petroglyphs as well.
Mhm.
And they think it may be earlier than even the sheep eaters being in this area of Wyoming. So petroglyphs are wonderful to see there.
Mhm.
Well, horseback riding, fishing, all good things.
I put the website on the chat, as well as thank you, Katrina. February 28th at 7 p.m. is our next conversation.
Yes.
I appreciate that.
Do you maintain a mailing list? I'd like to, well, I'll put that in my calendar. How do I
Yeah.
get an in?
Yes, please. If you email info@YO Interfaith, I'll put that in here. I will
Okay.
add you to our mailing list.
Thank you.
Email.
Thank you again, David and Reade, and all of our staff and guests, and
Thank you for
may you all be blessed with good times ahead.
Yes.
Thanks for your organization. It sounds really good. I knew about it through Maya Rose, but I would really like to know more about you all, and I'm glad for this opportunity.
We welcome you coming on board. Thank you for all you've shared. God bless you all. Have a great time ahead. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Thanks. Good.